Good morning. This is a hearing before the Boston Cannabis Board. Today is Wednesday, June 24th, 2020. Before we begin with the agenda, I'm just going to briefly address several administrative issues. Please note that this hearing is being recorded. This hearing will be posted to the City of Boston's website within 24 hours of the completion of the hearing. This hearing is being conducted pursuant to Governor Charles Baker's executive order dated March 22nd, 2020, which modified certain requirements of the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, due to the ongoing public health crisis related to COVID-19. This is what allows us today to meet virtually, and we appreciate everyone who's participating and everyone who is watching. Again, when you do join, please mute yourself.
Please enter your access code followed by the pound or hash.
Well, today's hearing, as are all hearings before the Boston Cannabis Board, are open to the public, and we encourage all members of the public to attend and participate. As no new items or new business is being considered or heard today, there will be no public testimony. Public testimony will always be encouraged and accepted at hearings at which new items or new business are being considered. And with that, I am going to introduce Kathleen Joyce, who is the chairwoman of the Boston Cannabis Board.
Thank you, and I want to welcome everyone for joining us today virtually for our first Boston Cannabis Board meeting. I'm joined today by my fellow commissioners, Darlene Lombos, Commissioner John Smith, and Commissioner Lisa Holmes. Each of us has been appointed by Mayor Walsh, and together we are charged with helping to advance equity, diversity, and opportunity in the cannabis industry. The mayor has demonstrated through these appointments that he's committed to setting a new national standard for equity. My expertise is in licensing. I have served for more than a year and a half as chair of the licensing board for the City of Boston and as executive director of the Mayor's Office of Consumer Affairs and Licensing. On November 26, 2019, Mayor Walsh, in partnership with Councilor Kim Janey and the Boston City Council, signed an ordinance establishing equitable regulations of the cannabis industry in Boston, and part of that ordinance established the Boston Cannabis Board. And a March 4th, 2020 executive order named the members of the board, and we are charged with making sure our actions match our values, supporting equity, diversity, and local ownership in the new industry. The Boston Cannabis Board is committed to providing a clear, predictable, and transparent process for businesses seeking a license. The City of Boston is taking proactive steps to ensure equity in this industry. It's not just equity and diversity to whom these licenses are being issued, but equity and diversity in the geographic distribution throughout the city. These are two very important and distinct things. Cities in other states have encountered serious equity problems in both where the businesses are located and in who is profiting from this industry. We want to make sure that these retail establishments are spaced across the city, and that the communities that have suffered the most from the war on drugs can access the opportunities from the legalization of this business. Boston is also requiring all applicants to demonstrate how they are prioritizing diversity and inclusion in their operating plans. Leslie, if you can get into our roles and duties of the board.
Certainly. Thank you, Chairwoman Joyce. I will now provide a brief overview of the roles and duties of the BCB. As the established local licensing authority for the City of Boston, the BCB has the citing authority over the time, place, and manner of each cannabis establishment within the City of Boston. This review will include the nature of the proposed operation, the potential impact on the surrounding community and quality of life of the residents, whether the area is adequately served by similar establishments, and the character and fitness of the applicant. The BCB is also the regulatory authority of all licensed cannabis establishments. The BCB may hold a hearing on any licensed premise inspection notice regarding an alleged violation of the rules and regulations of this board, as well as any city, state, or federal rule or guidance. All deliberations of the BCB are to be conducted in accordance with the open meeting law, meaning that they will be held and recorded during a public hearing. A written decision on any action taken by the BCB shall be issued within 30 days from the date of any vote. Currently, there are 14 executed host community agreements in the City of Boston, awaiting final approval by the Cannabis Control Commission. For these 14 establishments, the discretionary role of the board in terms of the siting and the time, place, and manner of these establishments is complete. The board's role regarding these 14 establishments moving forward is to administratively issue a license upon final authorization by the CCC, the Cannabis Control Commission, and proof of all necessary permits to operate from various city departments, such as a certificate of inspection or a certificate of occupancy from inspectional services. Moving forward, this board will also regulate these establishments as previously discussed. Attorney Alexis Tkachuk, who is the Director of the Office of Emerging Industries, will testify shortly to the significant progress the City of Boston has made in this regard since the passage of adult use recreational marijuana, and will also be available to answer any questions of the commissioners. As Chairwoman Joyce stated, the charge of the BCB is to ensure equity in both the granting of cannabis licenses in terms of the licensees themselves, as well as the geographical distribution of these licenses throughout the city. Regarding equity, Attorney Chayla White from the Office of Economic Development will also testify shortly regarding the certification process for those applicants seeking to be certified as equity applicants and how she will present that information to the board. I'm now going to give a brief overview of the process for the promulgation and adoption of rules and regulations by the board. Rulemaking is governed by Mass General Law, Chapter 30A. As I believe everyone on this call and watching is aware, the public comment period began June 17th, 2020, and extends through July 15th, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. The Boston Cannabis Board is balancing the need to provide clear, predictable, and transparent rules and a process for any individual interested in establishing a cannabis operation in the city of Boston, and to do so quickly while also ensuring that an opportunity for any interested party, including community members, that they have an opportunity to be heard. The draft rules and regulations have been posted to the city's website, and a public hearing regarding these draft rules and regulations will be held on July 8th, 2020 at 1 p.m. The board is currently accepting comments by mail, by email, and will accept in-person virtual testimony at that hearing. It is important to note that the board does not give more weight to one sort of testimony than another. For example, testimony that is provided in person at the virtual hearing will not be given more weight than any testimony that is sent in through mail or through email. The BCB anticipates that it will hold a public hearing on July 22nd to discuss and adopt these rules and regulations. And with that, I will turn it back over to Chairwoman Joyce, who will introduce Attorney Alexis Tkachuk.
Thank you. And before I introduce Alexis, I just wanted to give the other commissioners an opportunity to introduce themselves and to describe their background. Commissioner Lisa Holmes, if you want to unmute yourself and just describe your background, and I can't see you.
I'm here. You see?
Okay, yeah.
Morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Holmes, lifelong resident of Boston. Currently, I reside in Dorchester. My experience is I have 35 years with the Boston Police Department from the ground floor up. I started as a cadet and ended my career as a superintendent in charge of training. I have advanced degrees in counseling psychology as well as public safety management from Northeastern and Suffolk University, respectively. And I happen to live right in the neighborhood of the very first cannabis shop in Boston. So I'm very excited to be part of this board and bring my years of experience and expertise and my experience as being a lifelong urban Boston resident to this board.
Thank you. We're excited to have you. Commissioner Darlene Lombos.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Darlene, and I actually grew up in Portland, Oregon, but moved here about 14 years ago and worked for a coalition that brought together community organizations and unions to fight for progressive policies around a number of issues. I'm very excited to be part of this board. I actually have spent most of my life working with women and girls to take power and action around various issues in their neighborhoods, particularly women and girls of color, and have done so here in Boston as well. And now find myself as the head of the Greater Boston Labor Council. So that's a coalition of about 160 unions in the Greater Boston area, 24 cities, Boston being the largest city, of course, and bring the experience of fighting for workers' rights, particularly in cities, in urban cities. So I live in Roxbury in Eggleston Square, have been here for 13 years, and I'm really glad to be serving on this board. An honor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner John Smith.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, it's my real name, John Smith. I was born and raised in Trinidad in the Caribbean in the West Indies, but have lived in Dorchester. Basically, my family moved to the United States, to Boston, and have lived and worked in Dorchester probably for like the last 10 years. I live here presently, not far from Commissioner Lisa Holmes, so enjoying all the fireworks every night. And I presently work for TSNE Mission Works as the Director of Programming and Consulting. Went to school in New Orleans, Louisiana at Xavier University, and graduated from Tufts University with a master's in public policy. And previous to working at TSNE, I was at the Economic Development Department at the city as their policy analyst. So looking forward to working with all of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And now I want to ask Alexis Kachuk from the Office of Emerging Industries to give us an update and status of the applications that are currently pending before the CCC.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome, commissioners. I see that many people here attending the meeting might be aware of some of what I'm going to say, but please be patient because there are some newcomers. In the 2 years that state regulations have been in place to allow for Massachusetts cannabis sales, the City of Boston has established best practices and a regulatory framework that is transparent, accountable, and has led the way in delivering on racial and economic justice. Boston is the site for the only economic empowerment recreational retail shop in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, has executed host community agreements with 2 additional economic empowerment applicants and other diverse local entrepreneurs, and has made the most equitable and progressive steps to build a model for national success in the marijuana industry. To ensure the promise of equity is not illusory, and to avoid problems encountered in other states, Boston mandates that applicants complete a beneficial interest form so that an applicant's business, personal, and capital interests are disclosed, and states that providing false or misleading information will lead to a license revocation. An additional measure in Boston's deliberative approach to ensure goals are reached can be found in the city's host community agreements, which contain provisions for minority and women-owned business inclusion across all stages of a company's application: the build out, the marketing, the operations. That's in addition to ownership concerns. Prior to the establishment of the Boston Cannabis Board, the City of Boston, through the Office of Emerging Industries, executed host community agreements for cannabis establishments. All 14 entities holding a host community agreement have obtained the necessary zoning relief for use as a cannabis establishment from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and they are awaiting final approval from the Cannabis Control Commission, which is the state regulatory authority. These 14 host community agreements are located in 10 different neighborhoods throughout the city of Boston, and 3 are economic empowerment applicants certified by the Cannabis Control Commission. Presently, there are 2 medical-only dispensaries open in the city of Boston. These establishments were granted licenses from the Department of Public Health, though the CCC now has oversight over both medical and recreational marijuana. The medical-only cannabis dispensaries are Patriot Care, which is located at 21 Milk Street in downtown. It opened in August of 2016. Mayflower Medicinals at 230 Harvard Avenue in Allston, which opened in July 2018. There is 1 recreational cannabis retail establishment that has been issued a license from the CCC and administratively issued a license from the city of Boston. This is the first economic empowerment-owned site to open in Massachusetts. Its name is Pure Oasis. It is located at 430 Blue Hill Avenue in Dorchester, and it opened on March 9th of this year. There are 2 additional economic empowerment sites that are pending certification up at the state. They are Mojo's, which will locate at 1292 Blue Hill Avenue in Mattapan. A host community agreement was executed with them in September of 2019. Silver Therapeutics, which is opening at 717 American Legion Highway in Roslindale. They were executed a host community agreement in October 2019 and are awaiting authorizations up at the state. There's the following is a list of other cannabis establishments located within the city, which are pending authorization from the CCC. Green Line Boston, 100 Hampden Street in Roxbury. That will be a cultivation and manufacturing site only. Their agreement was executed in October of 2018. The Mass Patient Foundation, Apotheca Inc., located at 54A Hyde Park Avenue in Jamaica Plain. This is a medical-only site awaiting CCC certifications, and their host agreement was executed in October 2018. Ascend, Massachusetts, which will be located at 268 Friend Street in North Station. They are pending state authorization, and their host community agreement was executed in November of 2018. MedMen Boston, which will be located at 120 Brookline Avenue in the Fenway. They are waiting CCC authorization, and their host community agreement was executed in February 2019. Berkshire Roots, which will locate at 251 Meridian Street in East Boston, executed a host community agreement with the city of Boston in February 2019 and is waiting state approval. East Boston Bloom, which will locate at 71 Maverick Square in East Boston, also executed a host community agreement with the city of Boston in February 2019 and is awaiting state authorizations. Liberty Compassion, 591 Albany Street in the South End. This will be medical only. They executed a host community agreement with the city in February 2019 and are awaiting state approvals. Core Empowerment, which will locate at 401 Center Street in Jamaica Plain, pending state approval, and executed a host community agreement with the city of Boston in February of 2019. And the last one to mention is NSAJO Holdings, which will locate at 50 Clapp Street in Dorchester as a medical-only site. And they executed an agreement in June of 2019 with the city of Boston and are awaiting state authorizations. The discretionary role of the city of Boston is in determining time, place, and manner of these establishments, and for these, that is complete. The role of the board regarding these establishments will be to administratively issue a license upon the final authorization by the CCC and proof of necessary permits to operate from various city departments and to regulate the operations of these establishments. Once these Boston agreements are sent to the state, the CCC, according to Massachusetts general law, begins the process of background checks, insurance requirements, the inspections of operations to track the product, security measures, and site inspections. The city is notified when the state has completed its reviews, and the city must then work with the applicant to prepare for their opening and the issuance of their license to operate. So that is a general overview of where we stand at present in the city of Boston.
Thank you, Attorney Chuck. I just have a couple of questions for you about these host community agreements. I know there are 14 that are posted on our website. Those are 14 you just described in detail. They're currently under review at the state, at the CCC. When you were negotiating these host community agreements, what kind of terms were typically incorporated into them?
State law requires certain measures be taken, i.e. that the city not ask for anything that is unreasonably impracticable. So our host community agreements, they are all posted online because the city views those not only as an operational guide for the establishment, but also a guide for the community to be able to reference. So the host community agreements in general have hours of operation, the type of establishment, any unique operational needs that were discussed at a community meeting. By that, I mean no benches or social areas in and around the business. Some communities have requested cameras outside the establishment on the city street, signage that is consistent with the character of the neighborhood. Important to note in that side note there is the state regulates a large part of the graphics that may be used for signage. No marijuana leaves, nothing that could be advertised as something that might appeal to children. But we also put in our host community agreements that the signage must be consistent with the character of the neighborhood, that they must adhere to the security plan that they presented to the state, that they cannot transfer that host community agreement to a party that is not mentioned in the signed agreement with the city without approval of the city board. So it's generally fairly boilerplate in terms of an operational guide. It also provides that establishments give 3% of their gross revenue sales back to the city of Boston.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that explanation of the ones that are currently under review at the state. So how many applications would you say are pending before the city of Boston right now that either have requested to be certified as equity applicants or that have had a completed application before you?
At present, it appears there are about 7 businesses that are seeking consideration for the Boston Cannabis Board action.
And can you describe a little bit, and I don't know if this is a question for Attorney White, but to be considered a complete application before the city, what does that mean?
I'll let Attorney White jump in at a
Okay.
certain point, but the initial steps would be an application. The application says where you wish to site, what type of business you wish to site, what types of materials might be at that site, i.e. is there butane? Are there any extractions taking place on the site? It would include the filling out of the beneficial interest forms, so we know who owns, operates, or is financing a particular establishment. So that would be the application, and also whether an applicant would want to be considered for the City of Boston equity program. So that would be one part of the process. The other part would be going to the Inspectional Services Department to apply for a conditional use permit to operate. That triggers the community process. The community process then aligns itself with the state process in that you need to post and hold a public meeting. You need to notice the abutters to the site regarding the public meeting, and you need to make a presentation to the community. So that public meeting component, as well as notice to abutters, mirrors what the state also requires. It will then, once that is complete, it is also part of the ordinance to engage with the counselor, district city councilor in which the area you wish to cite. They will then provide a letter of support, opposition, or non-opposition, and seek to be heard and reviewed by the Cannabis Board.
Okay. And you had mentioned earlier Pure Oasis is our first retail establishment in the city of Boston. It's the first economic empowerment applicant in the state. They've been open since March. And can you describe for us how that's gone? I know they've been affected by COVID, but have you, as an operator in the city of Boston, how has that gone?
So far, it's gone smoothly. Their final approvals with the CCC and final inspections were the last week in February. The city then made several site visits to Pure Oasis to work with the operators to discuss where the line queuing would be, establish ride share drop-offs, speak with neighbors, inform the local community of how to call 311 if they noticed any problems, ensure that, you know, the crosswalks were appropriately labeled, that the traffic lights nearby were creating a smooth flow of traffic. We tried to learn from the few sites that opened ahead of Boston, where we saw queuing, unfortunately, people urinating, trash, traffic backups. So we tried to not have that happen in Boston. And thankfully, because the prep work, we didn't encounter any of those problems. The operator has been a very responsible operator. He is from the neighborhood. He recognizes that locating in a densely packed urban neighborhood with bus stops and churches and residents, he wants to be a good resident, and he has really worked hard with he's one of the few sites initially presented to the CCC that has an indoor waiting room. And that would prevent people from queuing and preventing egress on city sidewalks. So Pure Oasis has opened without any snafus of which we have seen in other areas with respect to recreational cannabis.
Okay. And one other question before I turn this over to my other commissioners to see if they have questions. And this might be also for Taylor. Do these applications have expiration dates? Like, is there a certain amount of time that it's considered active? Or, because I know you had mentioned in some of your testimony before City Council that a lot of places start the application process but never really complete it. And right now, you described 7 that are ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Some of that might lend itself to a bit of the equity program and some of the technical assistance. There are applicants that we are trying to work with in the process that for one reason or another aren't as ready to go. When the process opened, the city noticed that the initial application pool was generally experienced operators, larger corporations, and trying to foster the local entrepreneurial spirit. We haven't had hard and fast deadlines. We would rather work with an applicant to try to see if their plan can be viable with some assistance from the city. So there is no expiration date other than the Office of Civic Engagement has various neighborhood coordinators that check in frequently with different applicants regarding their status.
Okay. Do any of the other commissioners have any questions for Attorney Kachuk?
Smith, there's a question on here about, can we identify the 7 businesses?
Sure. I'm going to do this off the top of my head. So the 7 businesses are, there is one ready to go in East Boston. There is one ready to go in downtown. There is one that is a dual application for either Roxbury or Roslindale. There is one ready to go in Alston, Brighton. I'm going to have to talk to Attorney Chayla White, and I can circle back with you within a few minutes with the rest of that complete list. I apologize. One in downtown. The previously mentioned 21 Milk Street Medical is also seeking recreational. They have a completed application as well. And there's another one in Eastie as well. So that would be 2 in East Boston. I apologize for that. So that would bring us to the number that is ready to go.
Okay. I'm just going to jump in really quickly. I know we have, before we move back to the commissioners, I know there are a number of questions coming in on the chat function. Right now, we're not going to address those, but we will keep a running list and we can follow up with those answers just to give the commissioners an opportunity to ask each of the present attorneys any questions they may have, but we will get you all the information that you're requesting.
I have a question. Alex, what does dual applicant mean?
So it's a person that is seeking to site in more than one location in the city of Boston. So it's the same applicant. And you wouldn't consider both at the same time, but it is an applicant who put in an application for one neighborhood, and then the same applicant put in an application for another neighborhood. They have site control in more than one area in the city.
And is that something that is allowed? Or, I mean, that would, to me, that would appear that somebody would gain a monopoly on this business across the city?
It's going to be up to the board's discretion in reviewing the applications and determining the equity of who is owning and where they're siting. So that is something that the board can take under their purview.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do any of the other commissioners have any additional questions for Attorney Kachuk? And okay, and with that, I will ask Attorney White to talk about her certification of the equity applicants before the city.
Thank you, Chairwoman Joyce. Good morning, commissioners, and good morning to everyone else who has joined us today. I'm more than happy to tell you a little bit about the certification process. My answer might be a little lengthy, so please bear with me. So in order to ensure a fair and equitable review of the applications, I will consistently require that any entity seeking to be certified as a Boston Equity Program applicant submit the following documentation for each direct and indirect beneficial interest holder. All equity program applicants will be required to submit a corporate structure chart that is reflective of the ultimate beneficial interest in the company. This is in addition to the beneficial interest disclosure form that Attorney Kachuk mentioned earlier. I will also be requiring a driver's license or any other form of government issued identification that lists a home address. This will serve as proof of residency for the requisite time frames of living in Boston for 5, 7, or 1 year pursuant to the ordinance, and also as proof of residing in an area of disproportionate impact. In order to determine the area of disproportionate impact, I use the United States Census Bureau geocoder address search tool, which is consistent with the CCC. They use this tool to determine areas of disproportionate impact as far as their economic empowerment program and priority status, and also their social equity program. I will also require a query acknowledgement form for employment and licensing. For United States citizens, I will require a long form, a certified copy of their long form birth certificate or proof of naturalization. For non-US citizens, I will require a copy of their permanent resident card. For financial purposes, I will require a copy of the applicant's most recent federal income tax returns to determine whether or not they qualify as an equity applicant under the criteria of an annual household that is at or below 100% of the area median income. And lastly, I will require an acknowledgement form from all applicants that states, that attests to the truthfulness of the documents that they've provided to me. And as Attorney Kachuk mentioned earlier, I believe it will also include language about penalties for falsifying documents. And those penalties include a potential revocation of the host community agreement and a revocation of licenses issued by your board.
Okay, and I know it's the process sounds simpler than it actually is in practice. How will our board will be able to rely on your certification? So, and I know you're trying to figure this out right now, but what will we be getting to validate your certification?
Sure.
What can we rely on at the board level?
Sure. So I am available to testify at hearings as to my findings. I will also submit to the board my findings in writing with a cover letter that enumerates which criteria the applicant met, which documents I used to certify that they've met that criteria, and also a copy of those documents as well for your review.
Okay. And Attorney Kachuk mentioned 7 applications are ready to go. And of those applications that you're reviewing, how many of them have identified as equity applicants?
So I have been contacted by a number of entities that are interested in the Boston Equity Program. So I might have a few more than Attorney Kachuk mentioned.
Okay.
Some of these are some of them are kind of at an aspirational level, so they're not necessarily ready to go. But these are people that, you know, are very interested in the program and people that we can work with to get to the point where they're ready to submit an application for your review.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the other commissioners have any questions for Attorney White?
Yeah, thank you, Attorney White. I have a question about, can you talk a little bit about some of the supports that the City of Boston have for the equity program?
Sure.
Just when you mentioned that some of the applicants not quite ready, can you just talk a little bit about what kind of TA and other things that you're providing?
Sure. So at this point, the equity program is prepared to provide technical assistance, which includes, but is not limited to, assistance with business operations, including the development of a business plan, technical assistance with recruiting employees, guidance and assistance through the application process, technical assistance with legal compliance, accounting and tax preparedness assistance, best practices for opening in the marijuana industry, technical assistance with store security, and technical assistance identifying and raising funds and capital and identifying vendors.
And have any of the applicants, you said that some of the 7 that are pending at the state level right now are potentially equity applicants. How is the equity program promoted so that people know that there's actually TA and other assistance provided?
So the city has the details of the Boston Equity Program on its website. It started posting on its website in January. The city also has proactively emailed out to anyone who has expressed interest on the details of the equity program, how to apply, and Shayla's contact information. So we've not only put it out there on public notice, we've also proactively been reaching out to those who are interested in the cannabis space regarding the program, seeing if they're interested.
Commissioner Smith, any questions? No, okay. Commissioner Holmes, any questions for Shayla White? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Attorney Kachuk. Thank you, Attorney White.
And with that, I'm going to briefly go over our upcoming hearing schedule. So as Attorney Kachuk and Attorney White noted, that the certification of equity applicants is actively taking place. So we do anticipate in the coming weeks to be able to schedule a hearing for new applications. The board, it is very important, as we've discussed, the role of the board in ensuring equity, and part of that is the 1-to-1 ratio. And that means that we will not be scheduling a non-certified equity applicant unless and until we're ready to also schedule a certified equity applicant. So we will make sure that we once we do have a hearing scheduled, all interested parties will obviously be notified pursuant to the open meeting law. Currently, we have a hearing scheduled July 8th. The purpose of that hearing will be to take public testimony on the draft rules and regulations. Again, we anticipate meeting on July 22nd in order to discuss and adopt those rules and regulations. And public testimony obviously will be a very large part of the July 8th hearing. I did want to touch on one piece before we wrap up today, and that's the process for someone who is interested in applying for a cannabis license. One of the charges of this board is to provide a clear, predictable, and transparent process. And we are actively putting all of this information up on the website so that people have access to it. But we do, just to make clear what the steps are at the city level in terms of an application, would be filing an application. Once that completed application would be received, that is when the applicant undergoes the community process, working with the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services, as well as the District City Councilor's Office. Once they have completed the community process, they would appear at a hearing before this board. If granted, that applicant would then enter into a host community agreement. As Attorney Kachuk spoke to the typical conditions in that, most of that would already be worked out during the community process and at the hearing before the board. That applicant would then also file with the Zoning Board of Appeals for any necessary relief for either the underlying use, or if there is a buffer zone conflict, meaning a buffer zone, another existing cannabis establishment within a half mile. And if anyone is reviewing the draft rules and regulations, the board has proposed a process to provide a very clear and predictable process for anyone applying for a buffer zone, meaning someone with an existing cannabis establishment within a half mile. And with that, unless either the chairwoman or commissioners have any other questions, we will end this first public hearing of the Boston Cannabis Board.
No questions. We're excited to get started. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much. We appreciate everyone who participated and everybody who watched in. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe.